When the mayor's eldest son looked at my 13-year-old sister and said, "That one's almost ripe for the picking," I understood my family would be paying that debt forever. That night, I prepared a dinner where I served much more than food. Justice tastes bitter, but it satisfies the hunger for vengeance. Good morning, my dears. What a joy to be here talking with you today. I'm Eleanor Wilson, 72 years old, and I now live here in Boulder Creek, Colorado. It's a blessed place, with these beautiful waterfalls and a sky that seems endless. I ended up here after spending my whole life in rural Kentucky, but that's a story for another time. These days, my favorite pastime is making these quilts you see hanging behind me. Each little piece of fabric has a story, you know? Some were gifts, others I took from my children's old clothes, and some I bought at the local craft fairs. Quilting calms me, makes me feel like I'm piecing together the fragments of life, making sense of everything I've lived through. I started making these quilts in prison, believe it or not. It was a way to occupy my time and my mind. One of the guards, Nancy, saw me sitting quietly in the corner, not talking to anyone, and taught me how to quilt. "Miss Eleanor," she'd say, "put into your stitches what you can't put into words." And wouldn't you know she was right? Where I'm sitting now is my porch. You can see the mountains in the background, and when the sun rises, good heavens, it takes your breath away. I have my plants, my small garden, and this rocking chair that's been with me for a good 15 years. This is where I watch the world now, with different eyes, with a different piece. Before I continue my story, I'd like to ask those of you watching, if you enjoy what you hear, please leave a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. It really helps this old lady reach more people with her life stories. And you, my dears who are watching me now, tell me in the comments, what little town are you watching from? And what time of day did you find this video? Early morning with your coffee after lunch, or at night before bed? I always read all the comments, and I'm so happy to know where you're from and when you take time to listen to this grandma's stories. Let me know, okay? Let's create this chain of affection. Today, I'm going to tell a story I've kept inside for many years. A story about an old debt, the kind that marks families for generations. About what some people call honor, but has nothing honorable about it. About power, about silence, and about the day I decided that some chains need to be broken, whatever the cost. It's not a pretty story to hear, but it's my story. And maybe, just maybe, it might help someone going through something similar find the courage to change their destiny, like I changed mine. I was born in Millfield, Kentucky, a little town that back then was just dust, clapboard houses, and a small square with a church in the center. It was 1953, a time when life in rural America had a different rhythm. My father, Arthur Wilson, was a simple man who worked the fields on land that wasn't ours. My mother, Martha Johnson Wilson, took care of the house, and of me and my 3 siblings. I was the second oldest. Then came Jeremiah, 2 years younger than me, Timothy, 4 years younger, and finally my little sister Rose, who was 6 years younger than me. Our house was small, with a dirt floor and a roof that let us see the stars on nights when it rained hard. It had just 2 rooms, one for my parents and another where us 4 siblings slept cramped together. The kitchen was the heart of the home, with a wood stove that warmed everything on cold days and a backyard where we raised some chickens and had a small vegetable garden. Life wasn't easy, but it was happy in its own way. I remember waking up to the rooster's crow, still dark, and helping my mother light the fire to make coffee. The smell of fresh coffee mixed with the cornbread she made almost every day. It was our luxury, even though we were poor. A full belly gives strength for work, my mother always said. At school, I was studious. I loved learning, especially the stories that Miss Dorothy told about distant places I couldn't even imagine existed. I walked barefoot to the little schoolhouse, about 20 minutes from our home. On the way, I passed through the town center, where the Thornton family mansion stood. The Thorntons owned Millfield, everyone knew that. Mr. Richard Thornton had been mayor for 3 terms in a row when I was little, and then passed the position to his eldest son, Oliver, but everyone knew the old man was still in charge. They had the biggest farm in the region, the only general store that sold everything, and even the town bank belonged to them. People said not a leaf moved in Millfield without the Thorntons' permission. When I walked past their mansion, I always slowed my pace. It was the most beautiful building I'd ever seen, with large windows, a wraparound porch, and a front garden with flowers I didn't even know the names of. Sometimes I'd see Richard Thornton's 4 sons leaving on horseback. They were all men. Oliver, the oldest, already in his 30s back then. Gerald, who was a bit younger. Isaiah, who must have been in his early 20s. And Adam, the youngest, who was just a few years older than me. My mother always hurried me along when I stood looking at the Thorntons' house. "Lower your head and keep walking, girl," she'd say in a strange voice she only used when it came to that family. I didn't understand why back then, but I did as I was told. The games of my childhood were simple, like rural life. I played hopscotch with the other girls, jumped rope made of twine, and on Sunday afternoons, when there was no work at home, I'd go with my siblings to swim in the creek that ran near town. The water was cool and clean, and we'd return home with wet hair and skin smelling of the outdoors. My father worked hard. He left before sunrise and returned when it was already dark. Even so, he never seemed to have enough money. I remember hearing my parents talking in hushed voices at night, worried about bills, about the harvest, about the situation. I didn't really understand what this situation was, but I knew it was serious from the way they spoke. It was around my 12th birthday that I began to notice something strange between my family and the Thorntons. Whenever one of them passed near our house, my father would take off his hat and lower his head, even when he was on our own property. My mother would tense up, her shoulders hard as stone. Once, Mr. Richard Thornton stopped at our gate on his imposing horse, and my father ran to speak with him. I couldn't hear what they said, but I saw my father return with a pale face, his hands trembling. "What happened, Pa?" I asked when he came inside. "Nothing, daughter. Grown-up business," he answered, but his eyes said something else. That night, I heard my parents arguing. For the first time, I heard the expression that would change my life forever. Debt of honor. "We can't pay it, you know that," my mother said, her voice choked. "And what do you suggest? That we run away?" "Where to, Martha?" "They would find us, you know they would," my father answered, his voice tired from someone who had thought of all the possibilities. It was that same year I noticed how Adam, the youngest Thornton son, began looking at me differently when I passed by. It wasn't a boy's look at a girl. It was an owner's look at something that belongs to him. It gave me a chill in my stomach that I couldn't explain. On my 13th birthday, my mother didn't throw a party like in previous years. Instead, she called me for a serious talk. She sat me on the edge of the bed and with tear-filled eyes began explaining women's things to me. I thought it would be the talk about menstruation, which had already begun the year before. But it wasn't just that. "Eleanor, you're becoming a young woman, and you need to understand some things about our family, about our commitment," she said, carefully choosing her words. It was there, in that small room, with the smell of damp earth coming through the window after the afternoon rain, that I learned my life didn't belong to me. That even before I was born, I had been promised as payment for a debt my grandfather owed to the Thornton family, a debt that, according to my mother, was a matter of honor. After that conversation on my 13th birthday, things changed. My mother began teaching me things no girl that age should learn. How to serve at the table without making noise. How to lower my eyes when a man spoke to me. How to behave in the presence of important men. "One day you'll understand, daughter. It's our burden, but it's also our protection," she would say when she saw me crying after another lesson in submission. It was 2 weeks after my birthday that I fully understood what that debt meant. It was a Sunday, church day. My family was getting ready to go to service, me in a simple blue dress my mother had sewn, my hair tied in 2 braids. I remember I was putting on my sandals when we heard the sound of horses approaching. My father turned white as paper. "It's them," he said, and my mother began to tremble. It was Adam and Isaiah, the two youngest Thornton sons. They stopped their horses in front of our house, imposing in their fine clothes. "Good morning, Mr. Wilson," said Isaiah, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "We've come to take Eleanor for a ride." It wasn't an invitation. It was an order. My father looked at the ground, his hands squeezing his hat so hard that his knuckles turned white. "She's gettin' ready for church, Mr. Isaiah." "Church can wait," replied Adam, looking at me in a way that made my blood freeze. "Our father wants to get to know the girl better." My mother pulled me by the arm, taking me inside. I felt her body trembling as she adjusted my dress, ran her hand through my hair. "Go with them, Eleanor. Be polite. Do what they ask," she whispered, her eyes full of tears. "It's important for our family. It's the debt, you know." "But Ma, I don't want to go," I replied, feeling a fear I'd never felt before. She held my face between her hands, looking into my eyes with a mixture of pain and resignation I'll never forget. "We don't have a choice, daughter. We never had." It was with a heart as heavy as lead that I climbed onto the back of Adam's horse. As we rode away, I looked back and saw my mother standing at the door, one hand over her mouth, the other holding her rosary so tightly it seemed she wanted to break it. They didn't take me to the town center as I thought they would. We took a dirt road that led to the Thornton estate, a few miles from town. It was a huge property, with fields that seemed endless and a mansion much larger and more imposing than the one in town. When we arrived, Mr. Richard Thornton was on the porch, smoking a cigar. Oliver and Gerald were also there, playing cards at a table. They all looked at me when we dismounted, and I felt like an animal being evaluated for slaughter. "So this is the Wilson girl," said Mr. Thornton, looking me up and down. "Come here, girl." I approached trembling, my eyes fixed on the polished wooden floor of the porch. "Look at me," he ordered. When I raised my eyes, I saw an old but still strong man with eyes as cold as a snake's. He smiled, but it was a smile that gave me chills. "Do you know why you're here, girl?" I shook my head no, though deep down I already knew. I had heard stories whispered by the older women, stories about girls who went to work at the Thorntons' house and came back different, silent, with empty gazes. "Your grandfather, Samuel Wilson, borrowed money from my father many years ago. A large loan to save his land after a drought that killed almost all his cattle. He couldn't pay it back," explained Mr. Thornton, taking a puff on his cigar. "Do you know what happens to those who don't pay their debts, girl?" Again I shook my head, unable to speak. "They pay in other ways," he continued. "Your grandfather offered the land, of course, but my father, who was a generous man, made a different arrangement, an honorable agreement between the families." He made a gesture, and Adam approached, placing a hand on my shoulder. I felt his grip like claws. The men of the Thornton family would have certain privileges with the women of the Wilson family, for generations, until we considered the debt paid. My stomach turned. I wanted to run, scream, but I was paralyzed with fear. "It's an old tradition, girl. Your mother served my younger brother in her time. Now it's your turn to honor your family's commitment." It was at that moment I realized my mother knew exactly what would happen to me because she had gone through the same horror. That's why the empty look sometimes, the absolute submission, the fear of the Thorntons. "My sons will teach you how things work," said Mr. Thornton, standing up. "Be obedient like your mother was, and your family will remain protected. 'Cause problems." He left the threat hanging in the air, but the meaning was clear. Oliver stood up from the card table, approaching. "I'll go first," he said, grabbing me forcefully by the arm. "Come on, girl." I tried to resist, pulling my arm away, but he was too strong. "Please, let me go home," I begged, tears already streaming down my face. He laughed, a sound without joy. "You'll go home tonight, but you'll go back different." I was dragged into the house, to a back room. What happened in that room? Well, even after so many years, some things are hard to put into words. I can only say that the girl I was died that day. In her place, there remained only an empty body, a shell. When I returned home, it was already night. Isaiah brought me on horseback, leaving me at the door as if he were doing me a favor. I staggered in, feeling pains I had never felt before, inside and out. My mother was sitting at the kitchen table, waiting. When she saw me, her eyes filled with tears, but she said nothing about my condition. She just stood up, filled a basin with warm water, and began to wash me, as she did when I was little. "That's how it is, daughter," she whispered, as she carefully ran the cloth over my bruises. It was the same for me, too. We survive. "Why, Ma?" I asked between sobs. "Why don't we run away?" She stopped, looking around as if she feared the walls had ears. "I've seen what happens to those who try to run from the Thorntons. A family tried, a few years back. The father was found dead in the river, the mother and daughters. No one ever knew what became of them. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay looking at the ceiling, listening to my siblings' breathing, thinking about how my life had changed in a single day, and the days that would come, because it wasn't just that one time. From that Sunday on, the sons of Mr. Thornton began to appear regularly at our house. Sometimes they came all together, sometimes just one or two. My mother always warned me when she saw them approaching. "Go wash up, Eleanor." "They're coming," she would say, and I would obey automatically, preparing myself for the horror I knew would come. The worst was when my mother stayed outside the room while they were with me. Once, when I tried to scream in pain, I heard her firm voice from the other side of the door. "It's our family's debt of honor. Endure it to the end." The months turned into years, and the years into an endless nightmare. Between my 13th and 17th birthdays, I lived as a shadow in my own home. The sons of Mr. Thornton came whenever they wanted, sometimes in the middle of the night, knocking on our door as if they owned not just the land, but our lives. My father drank more and more to bear the shame. He would stop at the general store after work and only return staggering, his eyes red from moonshine and tears he never shed in front of us. Once, drunk, he tried to confront Gerald when he arrived at the house. He was beaten right there in our yard while we watched helplessly from the window. "Don't ever try that again, Mr. Wilson," Gerald said, wiping the blood from his knuckles on his expensive coat. "Next time, it won't be just you who pays." After that, my father seemed like a beaten dog. He would leave the house when they arrived, returning only hours later. He could no longer look me in the eyes. My brothers suffered too. Jeremiah, who was only 2 years younger than me, always had his fists clenched in anger, but knew he could do nothing. Once, at 14, he tried to defend me when Adam dragged me to the room. He received such a beating that he was bedridden for a week, spitting blood. "It's not worth it, Jeremiah," I would say, placing wet cloths on his bruises. "They're too strong." "One day I'll kill them all, Eleanor," he swore, his eyes burning with hatred. "I swear to God I will." But he never got that chance. When he turned 16, Jeremiah ran away from home. He left only a note. "I can't stand to see what they do to you anymore. I'm going to find help." We never heard from him again. Some said he had gone to Louisville, others that he had been found dead on the road. The Thorntons just laughed when they heard about his escape. "One less to worry about," said Oliver, now mayor for 2 terms, as he pushed me against the pantry wall. "Your little brother was smart. He knows he can't fight against us." Timothy, my other brother, dealt with everything differently. He stayed quiet, hidden as if wanting to become invisible. At 12, he was already a boy with dull eyes, without sparkle. He almost completely stopped talking. At school, the teacher said he was slow, that he had problems. They weren't problems, it was trauma. It was the weight of hearing his sister crying almost every night, while men too powerful to confront did with her what they pleased. And Rose, my little sister, She was growing up beautiful, with golden curls and big, innocent eyes. She was the only light in our dark house. Being the youngest, and because I did everything to protect her, she understood what was happening later. But children sense things. They see. When she was about 9, she asked me once, after Isaiah had left, "Why does that bad man come here, Eleanor?" I swallowed the knot in my throat. "It's grown-up business, Rosie." "Does he hurt you?" she insisted, her little eyes concerned. "No," I lied, forcing a smile. "He's just visiting." But she wasn't foolish. One night, I found her with a kitchen knife under her pillow. "What's this, child?" I asked, alarmed. "It's for when the bad man comes," she answered with a seriousness that broke my heart. "I'm going to defend you." I took the knife from her, terrified at the idea of what would happen if one of the Thorntons found my little sister armed. "Never, never do that, Rose. Promise. They're dangerous." She promised, her eyes full of tears. But I saw something born there, the same powerless rage that consumed Jeremiah. In town, everyone knew what happened in our house. It was an open secret, the kind everyone knows but no one mentions. The older women looked at me with pity when I passed by. The men averted their gaze, ashamed of their own cowardice. No one challenged the Thorntons. Once, when I was 15, I found the courage to speak with Pastor Anderson after the service. I told him everything, between tears and whispers, in the confessional. I thought he, as a man of God, could do something. "It's a difficult situation, my child," he said, after a long silence. "But these are agreements between families. It's not the church's place to interfere in matters of honor." I left the church more desperate than when I entered. Even the pastor, who should protect the weak, bowed to the power of the Thorntons. I tried to seek help elsewhere. Once, when I went to the neighboring town of Greenfield with my mother to buy fabric, I slipped away and went to the sheriff's office. The sheriff listened to me for 5 minutes, then gestured for me to stop. "Look, miss, I can't do anything against the Thornton family. They have powerful friends all the way to the state capitol. If I mess with them, I lose my job at best." At worst. He didn't complete the sentence, but the fear in his eyes said it all. I returned home defeated, finally understanding there was no escape. The power of the Thorntons extended far beyond Millfield. It was like being trapped in an invisible web, where each attempt to escape only tightened the threads around you. The years passed, and I became increasingly empty inside. By 17, I no longer cried when they came. I had learned to separate from my body, to let my mind wander far away while they did what they wanted. I thought about the clouds, the distant mountains, places where I could be free. My mother saw what was happening to me. One night, after Gerald and Adam left, she came into the room and hugged me for a long time. "You are strong, my daughter," she whispered. "Stronger than I ever was." "I don't feel strong, Ma," I replied, my voice as low as hers. "I feel dead inside." She brushed the hair from my face, as she did when I was little. "I know, but you will survive this. You have to survive." That's when I realized my mother wasn't just resigned. She was broken. She had accepted that life as inevitable, as a divine punishment we had to endure. I couldn't judge her. How could I, when I myself had tried every path and found only closed doors? The routine of horror continued. Oliver, being the mayor, came less often, but when he did, he was the worst. Gerald drank a lot and became violent. Isaiah was cold, calculating. Adam, the youngest, took special pleasure in humiliating me, in making me feel less than human. "You belong to us, understand?" he would say, as he pulled my hair. "You'll be ours until we decide we've been paid what's fair." What destroyed me most wasn't the physical pain, or even the humiliation. It was the knowledge that there was no end in sight, that this debt would never be considered paid. That it was just an excuse to exercise power, to subjugate. In the summer when I turned 18, something happened that changed everything. Mr. Richard Thornton, now old and ill, died of a heart attack. The entire town went to the funeral, including my family. We had to go. It wasn't an option. We stayed at the back of the church, quiet, heads bowed. During the funeral, I noticed how Oliver looked at Rose, who was now 12 and beginning to become a young woman. It wasn't just any look. It was the same look Adam had given me years ago, when it all began. A chill ran down my spine. After the ceremony, Oliver came to us, apparently to thank us for our presence, but his eyes never left Rose. "Your sister is growing up beautiful, Eleanor," he commented, running his hand over his chin. "Very beautiful." I felt my blood freeze. I knew that tone, that look. At that moment, I understood with crystal clarity. They planned to do to Rose the same thing they did to me. The debt would be passed to her when I got older, less interesting to them. I looked at my little sister, at her eyes still full of innocence despite everything she had witnessed in our house, and something broke inside me. Or perhaps it was something strengthening, a resolution taking shape. At that moment, I swore to myself, they would never touch my sister. Never. I would find a way to end that cycle, even if it cost my own life. Oliver's look at my sister at Mr. Thornton's funeral kept hammering in my head for days. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Rose going through the same hell I did. And that was unbearable. A week after the burial, my fears were confirmed. It was a Sunday afternoon. We were all at home. My mother was preparing dinner. My father had gone to the store to buy kerosene for the lamp. I was helping Rose with a rag doll we were sewing together. That's when we heard the horses. Through the window, I saw Oliver and Adam approaching. My heart raced. "Ma," I called, my voice trembling. "They're coming." My mother dropped the spoon she was stirring the beans with, dried her hands on her apron, and said automatically, "Go wash up, Eleanor." "No," I replied, looking at Rose, who had gone pale at the sound of the horses. "It's not for me they're coming this time." My mother followed my gaze to Rose and understood. I saw the terror spreading across her face. "No," she whispered, "she's just a child." "So was I replied, my voice firmer than it had ever been. At that moment, they knocked at the door. My mother was paralyzed, so I was the one who answered. Oliver and Adam were there, with their cold smiles. "Good afternoon, Eleanor," said Oliver, taking off his hat. "We've come to pay a visit to your family." "We're busy," I replied, trying to close the door. Oliver put his foot in the gap, preventing me from closing it. "Don't be rude." "We just want to talk." They forced their way in. Oliver went straight to where Rose was sitting, paralyzed with fear. "How are you, little Rose?" he asked, running his hand through her hair. "You're becoming a very beautiful young lady." Rose shrank back, looking at me with pleading eyes. Something inside me exploded. "Don't touch her," I said, my voice low but charged with an anger I didn't know I had. Oliver turned to me, surprised. In all those years, I had never resisted. "What did you say?" "I said, don't touch my sister," I repeated, placing myself between him and Rose. He laughed, incredulous. "Have you forgotten who's in charge here, Eleanor? Have you forgotten your family's debt?" "I haven't forgotten anything," I replied, "but the debt is with me, not with her." Oliver exchanged a look with Adam, who smiled in a way that gave me chills. Then, without warning, Oliver slapped me so hard I fell to the floor. "You decide nothing, you fool," he said, bending down to speak in my ear. "We decide. And we've decided your little sister is just the right age to start paying too." My mother finally reacted, running to embrace Rose. "Please, Mr. Mayor," she begged. "She's just a child, please." Oliver ignored my mother. He made a gesture to Adam, who grabbed Rose by the arm, tearing her from my mother's embrace. "No!" I shouted, getting up. "Take me instead. Do whatever you want with me, but leave her alone. We'll have both of you. replied Oliver, grabbing me by the neck. That's how it works. Your mother should have explained better. At that moment, the door opened and my father entered. He saw the scene. Me being held by the neck by Oliver, Rose crying in Adam's grip, my mother on her knees. For an instant, I saw something awaken in my father's eyes, a spark of courage, of anger. He dropped the can of kerosene and charged at Oliver. "Let go of my daughter, you bastard!" But he was no match for the two of them. Adam let go of Rose and helped his brother. In seconds, my father was on the floor, bleeding. "Pa!" shouted Rose, running to him. Oliver released me, straightening his wrinkled clothes. "That was stupid, Mr. Wilson. Very stupid." Adam picked up the can of kerosene my father had brought. "You know what happens to stupid people, Mr. Wilson?" he asked, pouring the liquid over my father, who was trying to get up. What happened next was so quick and so horrible that even today, so many years later, it seems like a nightmare. Adam took a match from his pocket, lit it, and threw it on my father. The flames spread instantly. The screams. My father's screams as he burned alive in our living room are something I'll never forget. My mother screamed too, trying to put out the fire with her apron, but it was too late. Rose was paralyzed with horror. So was I. We couldn't believe what we were seeing. When it was over, when my father stopped moving and the flames diminished, Oliver turned to us, his face illuminated by the orange light of the fire. "This is what happens when someone rebels against us," he said calmly, as if he were talking about the weather. "Now, perhaps you better understand how things work." They left, leaving behind my father's charred body and 3 destroyed women. The rest of that night is a blurred stain in my memory. I remember the neighbors coming to help, the women cleaning what remained of my father, the men building a simple coffin. I remember the smell of burned flesh that permeated the house for weeks. The next day, we buried my father in a corner of the cemetery. There was no investigation. The local sheriff, a friend of the Thorntons, recorded it as an accident with a lamp. No one questioned it, although everyone knew the truth. After the burial, we returned to our empty house. My mother locked herself in the room and didn't come out for days. I could hear her sobs during the night, a crying so deep it seemed to come from the soul itself. Rose wouldn't speak, wouldn't eat. She sat looking at the place where our father had died, now clean but forever marked in our memory. As for me, something changed inside me that night. Fear gave way to a cold, calculating hatred. It was no longer powerless rage, but something deeper, more dangerous. It was an absolute certainty that this couldn't continue. A week after my father's death, Oliver and Isaiah appeared at our door. I was already expecting them. "We've come to take little Rose for a ride," said Oliver, with that same cold smile. I looked at them, showing no emotion. "She's sick. High fever. You don't want to catch what she has." Oliver frowned, suspicious. "You'd better not be lying, Eleanor." "Why would I lie?" I replied, holding his gaze. "I'll be here when you return. And when Rose gets better, she will be too." They left, but I knew they would return. We had little time. That night, while Rose slept, I finally approached my mother. She was sitting in the kitchen, staring at nothing, a shadow of the woman she had once been. "Ma," I said, sitting across from her, "we have to do something." She raised her empty eyes to me. "There's nothing to do, daughter. You saw what they did to your father." "I saw," I replied. "And that's why we can't let them touch Rose. That's why we have to end this once and for all." "How?" she asked, her voice broken. "They're too powerful." I took her hands in mine. They were cold, trembling. "Remember Grandma Esther? What she taught us about the plants in the woods?" My mother's eyes widened, immediately understanding. My grandmother had been a healer, knew all the plants of the forest, those that healed and those that killed. "Eleanor," she began, frightened. "There's no other way, Ma," I interrupted. "They'll be back, for Rose, for both of us. I won't let them do to her what they did to me, what they did to you." I saw the fear in her eyes, but I also saw something else, determination, a mother protecting her young finally. "What are you thinking of doing?" she asked. And there, at the kitchen table where so many family meals had taken place, where so many tears had been shed, I elaborated my plan. A plan born of desperation, of hatred, and of a fierce love for my sister that surpassed even the fear of death. The next morning, I went into the woods behind our house. I knew exactly what to look for, where to find it. My grandmother's lessons were etched in my memory. I returned with a small bag of herbs that I carefully hid at the back of the kitchen cabinet. That night, lying in bed next to Rose, who had finally managed to fall asleep, I made a silent promise. "They will never touch you again, little sister. Never again. Whatever it costs." And it would cost dearly, I knew that. But I was willing to pay the price. 3 days after gathering the herbs in the woods, I put my plan into action. First, I needed to gain time and trust. I went to see Oliver in his office at the town hall, something I had never done before. The secretary, Nancy, looked at me suspiciously when I asked to speak with him. "The mayor is busy," she said, avoiding my gaze. "Tell him it's Eleanor Wilson. He'll see me." She hesitated, but went to the office door and announced my presence. I heard Oliver's voice telling her to let me in. When I entered the spacious, luxurious office, so different from our simple home, Oliver was sitting behind a dark wooden desk. He smiled when he saw me, that smile that always made my blood run cold. "Eleanor," he said, leaning back in his chair. "What a surprise. You came looking for me of your own free will?" I lowered my eyes, feigning submission. "I came to apologize for my family's behavior, Mr. Mayor. After my father's death, my mother and sister are very shaken. We need time." He studied me for a moment. "Time? And what do I gain from that?" I swallowed hard. I thought that perhaps we could make a deal. I would continue, serving you gentlemen as before. But you would leave my sister alone until she's a bit older. Oliver laughed. "And why would I accept that when I can have both of you?" "Because I would be more cooperative," I replied, forcing myself to look at him. "There would be no resistance. And to show my goodwill, I would like to invite you and your brothers to dinner at our home. A dinner of reconciliation." He raised his eyebrows, surprised. In all those years, we had never invited the Thorntons for anything. They always took what they wanted. "A dinner?" he repeated, suspicious. "Yes. My mother will make that chicken and rice that your brother Gerald likes so much. And I myself will prepare a special dessert. A milk pudding with herbs from the forest, my grandmother's recipe." He studied me for a long moment. I saw the suspicion in his eyes, but I also saw interest. The idea of us being the ones to invite them, to serve them voluntarily, appealed to his ego, to his sense of power. "Very well," he finally said. "When would this dinner be?" "Next Sunday at 7 in the evening," I replied promptly. "If you could let your brothers know." "I'll let them know," he said, standing up and coming around the desk. He approached me, touching my face with the back of his hand. "This is interesting, Eleanor. You've finally learned your place." I contained the impulse to back away, to bite that hand that touched me. Instead, I forced a smile. "Yes, Mr. Mayor, I've learned." When I left the town hall, my heart was beating so hard I thought it might explode in my chest. Part of the plan was underway, but the hardest part was yet to come. The following days were of careful preparation. My mother, though terrified, followed my instructions. We cleaned the house like never before, set the table with our best tablecloth, which wasn't that good anyway, polished the few silver utensils we had inherited from my grandmother. Rose watched us with confused eyes. She didn't understand why we were inviting to our home the men who had killed our father, the men who had terrorized us for years. "Why are they coming to dinner here?" she asked as she helped me clean the dishes. I looked at my mother, who nodded slightly. It was time for Rose to know, at least part of the truth. We're going to resolve an old situation, Rosie, I explained, holding her hands. But I need you to do exactly what I'm going to ask. On Sunday when they arrive, you're going to stay at Mrs. Jenkins's house. Mrs. Jenkins was our neighbor, a widowed lady who lived alone and had always been kind to us. I don't want to go, Rose protested. I want to stay with you. No, my dear, my mother intervened. It's better that you're not here. It's a grown-up conversation. Is it because of the debt? She asked, surprising us. The one they say we have to pay? My mother turned pale. I know about this? I heard you talking, she replied, with a wisdom beyond her years. And I saw what they do to Eleanor. I'm not a child anymore. My mother sat down, her legs trembling. My God. That's why we need to resolve this, Rose, I said, kneeling in front of her. And we need you to be safe while we do it. Do you trust me? She nodded, her eyes tearful. I trust you. Then please, do what we're asking. Go to Mrs. Jenkins's house on Sunday and don't leave until either Mother or I come to get you. Promise? I promise, she replied, hugging me tightly. The days passed slowly until Sunday. On the eve, I prepared the special milk pudding, using the herbs I had collected. I worked alone, late at night, after everyone had already gone to bed. My grandmother Esther's recipe was precise, a mixture of forest plants that, in small doses, caused only discomfort, but in larger quantities. On Sunday, at 5 p.m, we took Rose to Mrs. Jenkins's house. Stay here until I come to get you, I said, kissing her forehead. Whatever happens, don't leave here. She nodded, serious. I think, even at 12, she knew something grave was about to happen. We returned home and finished the preparations. My mother prepared the chicken and rice, her most famous dish, with well-seasoned rice, succulent pieces of farm chicken, and plenty of seasoning. I set the table, putting out our best. The lace tablecloth my grandmother had made, the plates we only used on special occasions, the glass cups we kept in the top cabinet. In the center of the table, I placed a bottle of wine I had bought at the store. It wasn't a fine wine like the Thorntons drank, but it would serve the purpose. Next to it, the milk pudding in an earthenware bowl covered with cinnamon. At 7 o'clock sharp, we heard the knocks at the door. They were punctual, at least that. My mother opened it, greeting them with a formality she had never used before. Good evening, Mr. Mayor. Gentlemen, please come in. The four entered, looking around with curiosity and a certain disdain. They had never been in our house as guests. They always came as invaders. Where is little Rose? Asked Oliver, immediately noticing her absence. She's at the neighbor's house, I replied quickly. We thought it best she not participate in the dinner. It's an adult conversation, after all. Oliver frowned, but Gerald was already sniffing the smell of the food. This chicken and rice smells wonderful, Mrs. Wilson. My mother forced a smile. Thank you, Mr. Gerald. I hope you enjoy it. We sat at the table. I served wine for them, a glass for each. For me and my mother, I served water. Aren't you going to drink with us? Asked Isaiah, suspicious. Unfortunately, we can't, I replied. We're taking medicine that doesn't mix with alcohol. Women's problem, you know? They laughed, those coarse laughs I knew so well. The dinner proceeded. They ate heartily, praising my mother's cooking. With each bite they took, I felt a mixture of disgust and anticipation. When they finished the main course, I brought the pudding to the table. A special dessert, I announced. My grandmother's recipe. I served a generous portion for each of them. For me and my mother, I put just a small spoonful to disguise. A toast, proposed Oliver, raising his wine glass, to our reconciliation. I raised my glass of water. To justice, I said softly, but no one seemed to notice the difference. They ate the dessert with gusto. Adam even had seconds. They talked, laughed, spoke of politics and business as if they were at any normal dinner, as if they weren't the monsters who had destroyed our lives. It was about 20 minutes after dessert that Gerald began to sweat. He ran his hand over his forehead, loosened his collar. "Is it hot in here, isn't it?" he commented. Soon after, Adam took his hand to his stomach. "I'm not feeling well." Isaiah was next, visibly paling. "What was in that pudding?" he asked, already suspicious. Oliver, who was always the most astute, stood up abruptly. "You," he began, but couldn't finish the sentence. He doubled over the table, vomiting. The other three also began to feel ill. Vomiting, tremors, cold sweats. Gerald fell from his chair, writhing on the floor. "What have you done?" shouted Oliver, trying to stand up, but his legs wouldn't obey. My mother was paralyzed, watching the scene with horror. But I remained calm, strangely calm. "The debt is being paid," I replied, my voice firm. "The real debt." All four were now on the floor, groaning, writhing. Adam was the first to stop moving. His eyes became glazed, fixed on the ceiling. Then it was Gerald, who had a violent convulsion before becoming motionless. Isaiah still tried to crawl to the door, but couldn't. He died halfway there, his hand outstretched as if begging for help. Oliver was the last. Even poisoned, even dying, he still found the strength to curse me. "You'll pay for this, you wretch," he gasped, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. "You'll rot in jail." I knelt beside him, looking into his eyes that were already beginning to lose focus. "Perhaps," I replied, "but the debt is paid, and my sister will never know what it's like to be touched by hands like yours." Those were his last words. Minutes later, the four men who had terrorized our family for generations were dead in our dining room. My mother cried silently in a corner. I approached, holding her hands. "It's done, Ma," I said. "It's over." "What do we do now?" she asked between sobs. "Now I take responsibility. You take care of Rose. Make sure she has a life different from ours." I went out to the street and walked to the sheriff's office. The local sheriff, John Benson, was there, a man who had always turned a blind eye to the Thorntons' abuses, who had never helped us when we needed. "The Thornton brothers are dead," I announced as I entered. "I poisoned them. They're in my house." He looked at me as if I had lost my mind. "What?" he stammered. "You heard me. I killed them all." With herbs, my grandmother taught me to recognize it was me, just me. My mother had nothing to do with it. I was arrested on the spot, handcuffed, and locked in a cell at the back of the sheriff's office. The news spread through town like wildfire. The four most powerful men in Millfield, dead at the hands of an 18-year-old girl. The trial was quick. There wasn't much to defend. I had confessed, taken all the blame. I explained why I did what I did, told about the years of abuse, about my father's death, about the threat to my sister. But that mattered little to the judge, who was a close friend of the Thorntons. I was sentenced to 25 years in prison for aggravated homicide. They sent me to the women's penitentiary in Louisville, far from everything and everyone I knew. But you know, even in the darkest moments of those prison years, I never regretted it. Each day I spent behind bars was a day my sister was free, a day she could grow up without the fear that had been my constant companion for so many years. I was released from prison in 1996 after serving my 25-year sentence. I had entered as an 18-year-old girl and came out as a 43-year-old woman, with gray strands already appearing among my dark hair and deep lines around my eyes. But I came out with my head held high, never having regretted what I did. The world outside had changed a lot. The first time I saw a cell phone, I thought it was some kind of toy, computers, internet. All of this was new to me. But some things never change. The Colorado sky was still blue as ever. The smell of earth after rain was still the same, and the feeling of freedom. Oh, that's priceless. My mother had passed away 2 years before my release. A heart condition took her while she slept. I couldn't go to the funeral, but one of the guards, Nancy, who was always kind to me, brought me flowers to place in a small ceremony we held in the prison chapel. I cried for days. Despite everything, my mother had been a victim as much as I was. She did what she could with the tools she had, a prisoner of a system of oppression that came from generations. But Rose, my Rose, survived and flourished. When I got out of prison, she was already a 37-year-old woman with a law degree, married, and with 2 children. She came to pick me up on the day of my release, and the hug we exchanged at the exit of those gates was worth every day I spent locked up. "You saved my life," she told me, holding my face between her hands. I never forgot that, not for a day. She had moved to Boulder Creek, Colorado, where her husband James, a completely different man from the Thorntons, had gotten work as an engineer at a mining company. That's where I went after prison, to be close to the only family I had left. In the first months, living in freedom was a challenge. I was startled by loud noises, couldn't sleep in a room alone after decades of sharing a cell with other women, and got lost in the streets of the town I didn't know. But Rose and James were patient. Their children, my nephews Theodore and Sarah, 15 and 12 at the time, welcomed me with the curiosity and openness that only children have. "Aunt Eleanor is a hero," Rose would tell them. She didn't tell all the details, of course, but they knew I had protected their mother from very bad men. Over time, I adapted. I got a job at a small fabric store in the town center. The owner, Dorothy, was a widowed lady who didn't care about my past. "Everyone deserves a second chance," she told me when I shared my story. That's where I learned to quilt better. I started making patchwork quilts in my spare time, using pieces of fabric that were left over in the store. At first, it was just a way to occupy my hands and mind, but soon I realized I had a talent for it. The colors, the patterns, the feeling of creating something beautiful from pieces that would be thrown away. It was a metaphor for my own life. Gradually, the people in town got to know me. At first, there were suspicious looks, whispers when I passed by. After all, it's not every day you meet someone who killed 4 men. But over time, as I became part of the community, the looks changed. Some even came to ask for advice, especially women who were living in difficult situations with abusive husbands or partners. "How did you find the courage?" they would ask. And I always gave the same answer. It wasn't courage, it was love. Love for my sister, for myself, for all the women who would come after us. I never returned to Millfield. After the death of the Thorntons, the town changed, from what Rose told me. The power that had been in the hands of that family for generations dispersed. There were free elections for the first time in decades. People began to talk, to tell stories of abuses they had suffered or witnessed. It was as if a spell had been broken. About 10 years ago, I retired from the fabric store. Dorothy had passed away, and her children wanted to sell the business. I understood it was time for a change. With the small savings I had gathered and the help of Rose and James, I bought this little house where I live today. It's simple, but it's mine. It has a porch where I can watch the sunset behind the mountains, a small garden where I grow herbs, only medicinal ones now, and enough space to receive my nephews and their children when they come to visit. My days now are peaceful. I wake up early, with the birds singing. I have my coffee on the porch, watching the movement on the street. Sometimes I go to the square, where I sell my patchwork quilts at a little fair that happens on Sundays. Other times, I receive visits from young women Rose introduces me to. Law students, women's rights activists. They want to hear my story, understand what it was like to live in those times, what led me to do what I did. I tell it honestly, without glamorizing, without making myself a victim. I made a terrible choice, but a necessary one. I paid my price to society, and I sleep at peace with my conscience. Theodore, my oldest nephew, is now 44 and has 3 children. He's a university professor in Denver, teaching history. Sometimes he uses my story as an example when he talks about the power of rural bosses in America, about how official justice often failed the most vulnerable. Sarah, the youngest, followed in her mother's footsteps and became a lawyer. She works defending women who are victims of domestic violence. I'm very proud of both of them. Rose and James are retired now, but they remain active. She gives talks on human rights. He does volunteer work building houses for needy families. They're an admirable couple, the kind of people who make you believe the world can be better. As for me, I'm just an old woman who makes quilts and tells stories. Hands that once served to take lives now create beauty. I don't know if it's redemption, but it's enough for me. I carry my scars with dignity, the visible ones on my calloused hands and the invisible ones, in the memories that sometimes still haunt me on stormy nights. But when I look back at everything I've lived through, I don't see just pain and loss. I also see strength, resilience, and above all, the silent victory of having broken a cycle of abuse that could have continued for more generations. I see my sister, who grew up free from the terror I knew. I see my nephews and great-nephews who will never know what it's like to live under the yoke of men like the Thorntons. And that, my dears, is priceless. My dears, in telling my story, I'm not looking to glorify what I did. Taking lives is always a tragedy, even when we feel there's no other way out. What I hope is that no one else needs to reach the point I reached to protect those they love. If you're going through situations of abuse, know that today there are paths that didn't exist in my time. There are laws, specialized police stations, shelters, people willing to help. Seek that help. Don't be silent. Your voice is powerful, even when trembling. I've learned that age doesn't define our strength, but rather our ability to start anew each day. My wrinkles are maps of survival. Each one tells a story of pain overcome. Life taught me that even in the deepest darkness, our inner light never goes out. I never allowed my dignity to be stolen, even when they tried to take everything from me. I discovered that we are stronger than we imagine, especially when we think we can't take any more. Time doesn't heal all wounds, but it teaches us to live with them and still smile. My story isn't about what they did to me, but about how I chose to respond. I learned that true strength isn't in never falling, but in getting up every time. Abuse leaves invisible scars, but recovery shows that we can flourish even after the storm. In any country, in any culture, no one has the right to subjugate another human being. No one has the right to use power, money, or tradition to abuse vulnerable people. Human dignity is a universal value that must be respected. If you know someone living in situations of abuse or violence, extend your hand. Sometimes all a person needs is to know they're not alone, that someone believes them. Be that person. You can be the difference between despair and hope in someone's life. And if you're going through difficult times now, remember, storms pass. They may last longer than we'd like. They may leave us with scars, but they pass. And on the other side, there is light. There is always light. My dears who have watched this far, I need your support right now. This story I just told isn't just mine. It's the story of so many other women who have lived and still live in similar situations. If you felt your heart tighten with what you heard, please subscribe to the channel now and hit the notification bell. Each subscription is like an extended hand saying, I heard you, I believe you. Share this video immediately with someone who needs to hear this message of hope and overcoming. You never know who might be suffering in silence, thinking there's no way out. Your share could save a life, could give someone the courage to seek help before they reach the desperation that led me to do what I did. Leave in the comments the word prison so I know you watched until the end and understood the message. Each comment shows me that my story, with all its pain and overcoming, wasn't in vain. Do this now. Don't wait another minute. Your action could be the beginning of someone's liberation. I end with a certainty I carry in my heart. No matter how dark the night, the sun always rises again. And when it rises, it illuminates all of us equally, regardless of the mistakes and right choices we made along the way. Life is made of difficult choices, but also of possible new beginnings. Thank you for listening to me. May God bless each one of you and guard your paths.